Hello. Greetings, everybody. What's going on? What's happening? This your girl Tiffany coming through here live in effect on this beautiful Monday, on April the 11th, 2022. Ramadan Mubarak to all the beautiful people out there. They are celebrating Ramadan. And thank everybody else for coming through. Make sure you subscribe and share the channel and hit the notification bell, all right? Let's get into it. So today we're going to be talking about the Ahmadiyya movement. So the Ahmadiyya movement was a movement that, it's still around to this day. It actually started in India, and one of the Ahmadi Muslim who was Indian, who I am going to go into, he came to America around the 1920s, and he went to places like Chicago and Detroit, and he started introducing the Ahmadiyya movement to the African American community, right, and other communities as well. So it was a multiracial movement, but you have predominantly African Americans that joined this movement in the 20s, okay? And this was before the Nation of Islam, the Moorish Science Temple of America, and all of that, okay? It was the Ahmadiyya movement, so a lot of people don't know about it. Myself, I didn't even know about this, so I happened to look it up. So I'm going to be sharing the information on that. So make sure you guys like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. All right. So let's just go to the information of what is the Ahmadiyya first and foremost. Okay. Okay, hopefully you guys can see my screen. Cool. All right, so what is the Ahmadiyya? So the Ahmadiyya is an Islamic revival or Masonic movement originating in Punjab, British India in the late 19th century. It was founded by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, who claimed to have been divinely appointed as both the promised Mahdi and Messiah, expected by Muslims to appear towards the end times, and bring about peaceful mean the final triumph of Islam, as well as to embody in this capacity the expectant of what is it called eschatological figure of other major religious tradition. Okay. And this terminology here, let's look at what this term means. All right, so eschatology means the concern, expectation of the ends of the present age, human history, or the world itself. Means the end of the world or end times, like the Armageddon, basically. It's predicted by several world religions, which teach that negative world's event will reach a climax. Belief that the end of the world is imminent is known as the apocalypticism, and over time has been held both by members of the mainstream religions and by doomsday cult. In the context of mysticism, the term refers metaphorically to end of ordinary reality and to reunion with the divine. Various religions treat eschatology as a future event prophesied in sacred texts or in folklore. Right. So to better explain that terminology, it's like basically the Armageddon. So if y'all know about the Armageddon, at that time was supposed to be the end time, there's going to be the end of the world, etc. That's what that terminology means. Okay. All right, so let's continue on. Let's go down. All right, so it says adherents of the Ahmadiyya, a term adopted expressly in reference to Muhammad's alternative name, Ahmad, are known as Ahmadi Muslim or simply Ahmadis. All right. So it says Ahmadi thought emphasizes the belief that Islam is the final dispensation for humanity as revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the necessity of restoring it to its true intent and pristine form, which had been lost through the centuries. Its adherents consider Ahmad to have appeared as the Mahdi, bearing the qualities of Jesus in accordance with their reading of the scriptural prophecies to revitalize Islam and set in motion its moral system that would bring about lasting peace. They believe that upon divine guidance, he purged Islam of foreign accretion and beliefs and practices by championing what it is. In their view, Islam original precepts as practiced by Muhammad and the early Muslims community. Ahmadis thus view themselves as leading the propagation and renaissance of Islam, right? And so, and then go further down to say, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad established a community on March the 23rd, 1889, by formally accepting allegiance from his supporters. Since his death, the community has been led by a succession of caliphs. By 2017, it has spread to 210 countries and territories of the world, and concentration in South Asia, West Africa, East Africa, and Indonesia. The Ahmadis have a strong missionary tradition, have formed the first Muslim missionary organization to arrive in Britain and other Western countries. Currently, the community is led by its Caliph, Mirazi Marul Ahmad, and is estimated to between 10 and 20 million worldwide. So they have a very large base. The movement is also entirely a single, highly organized group. However, in the early history of the community, some Akhmadi descended over the nature of Ahmad's prophetic status and succession. They formed the Lahore Ahmadiyya Movement, right, which has since dwindled to a small fraction of all Ahmadis. Ahmadiyya's recognition of Ahmad as a prophet has been characterized as heretical by mainstream Muslims who believe that Muhammad was the final prophet, and the Ahmadiyya movement has faced non-recognition and persecution in many parts of the world. The term Qadiani is used pejoratively to refer to the movement. So to translate that, other Muslims community, right, especially those in the Sunni Muslim community, they believe that the Ahmadiyya movement is haram, meaning that it's unlawful. Oh my goodness, hold on. Okay, I hope you guys can still hear me. Sorry about that. But yeah, in the Islamic community, they believe that the Ahmadiyya movement is haram, basically. That's just to sum it up. All right, now let's go into the Akhmadiya movement in the United States. Okay. All right, so right here, we're going to look at this guy. Let's see. Peace, brother. How you doing? Peace and shalom alaikum. Always an interesting subject. Islam from an Eastern Indian perspective. Yes, it is. Peace. I thank you for coming through, Brother Kamathi. Thank you for coming through. I appreciate you a lot. You know, you always an open-minded individual and everything. But yeah, you know, Islam, see, what people got to understand, you know, when you study the Islamic culture, there's different set of Islamic religion. Now, some of them are not recognized, but the main two that is recognized is a Shia and Sunni Islam. You know, Sufism is dealing with the mysticism of Islam, and then you got all the other set that come along, all the different branches that's like supposedly, quote unquote, the offshoot of the Sunni Muslim movement or the Shia movement or the Sufi movement. You know what I mean? So, yep. All righty then. Let's go ahead and let's get into this subject matter. All right, so again, the Akhmadiya is an Islamic branch in the United States. The earliest contact between the American people and the Ahmadiyya movement in Islam was during the lifetime of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad in 1911, during the era of the first caliphate of the community, the Ahmadiyya movement in India began to prepare for its mission to the United States. However, it was not until 1920s, during the era of second caliphate, that Mufti Muhammad Sadiq, under the directive of Caliph, would leave England on SS Haverford for United States. Sadiq established the Ahmadiyya movement Muslim community in the United States in 1920. The U.S. Ahmadiyya movement is considered by some historians as one of the precursors to the civil rights movement in America. The community was the most influential Muslim community in African American Islam until the 1950s. Today, there are approximately 15,000 to 20,000 American Ahmadi Muslims spread across the country. Okay? So, as you can see, it was very influential. Hold on, let me highlight that. It says the community was the most influential community in the African American Islam until 1950s. All right. Now, this is before the Nation Islam even came into existence, right? This is before Nation Islam. This is before the Moorish Temple of America. All right, then. I don't know what happened. My screen went out on me, so guess I gotta do it like this. But anyways, let's go ahead and continue. Okay. So now let's go further down. Go back and share my screen window. All right, so right here it says the earliest contact between the American people and Akhmadi Muslim in India was during the early era of Mazhar Ghulam Ahmad. All right, I already read that part. So in 1886, roughly 3 years prior to the establishment of the Ahmadiyya movement, Alexander Russell Webb initiated a correspondence with Ahmad in response to an advertisement published by the latter. Before 1886, Webb studied several Eastern religions, including Buddhism. His first interaction with the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement was the first serious step towards understanding Islam. The initial correspondence consists of 4 letters, 2 from both sides. Although Webb's letter indicated that he was becoming inclined towards Islam to the extent of showing willingness to propagate it, the letters do not demonstrate that he had converted to the religion. However, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community does stress that correspondents were instrumental in Webb's later conversion to the religion. James Smith writes that the correspondents were key to Webb's conversion to Islam. On his visit to India in the early 1890s, Webb stated that it was because Ahmad that he had the honor to join Islam. His correspondence with Ahmad began during a period when the latter had gained fame throughout India as one of Islam's leading champions against Christian missionary activity in India during the colonial era. However, after the initial correspondence with Webb, Ahmad quickly became one of Islam's most controversial figures due to his Masonic claims. As a result, on his visit to India, Webb abstained from paying a visit to Ahmad. In spite of this, he remained in contact with Ahmad until his death in 1908. In 1906, he wrote to Ahmad regretting his decision to avoid him. Alas, I came to India, but did not visit you, although it was through you I found the right guidance. In not meeting you, I tried to please some people so that they would give donation. They did not keep their promises and no donation were made. Now I regret greatly that I deprived myself of meeting a man of God for such people. Okay. All right, so now let's go down to the arrival. Okay. All right, so this is about a guy right here. So he's happening, as you can see, he's a European who was converted to the Ahmadiyya movement. So now let's go down to the arrival of Motif Muhammad Sadiq. All right. Now it says that despite the earliest onset interaction with the American people, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community only began to prepare for its mission to the United States in 1911 during the era of the first caliphate. However, it wasn't until almost a decade later, on January 24th of 1920, during the era of second caliphate, that Motif Muhammad Sadiq, the first missionary to the country, would embark on the SS Haverford from England for the United States. On board, Sadiq preached the Islamic faith on each day he spent on the transatlantic liner, with many passengers intrigued by Sadiq's teaching on the life of the Islamic prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the claims of Mazara Ghulam Ahmad as the return of the Messiah. 7 people of Chinese, American, Syrian, and Yugoslavian heritage converted to Islamic faith. However, on the arrival of SS Haverford on the shores of Philadelphia, the authority accused Sadiq of preaching a religion that permits polygamous relationship. As an Ahmadi Muslim, Sadiq believed that the law of the land precedes the practice of non-accessional Islamic principles. Despite this and his assurance that he did not preach polygamy on board, the authorities refused his entries into the United States and demanded him to take a return trip back to Europe. Sadiq refused and submitted an appeal. Having successfully appealed against the decision, during the course of which he was temporarily detained and placed in Philadelphia detention house in Gloucester, New Jersey, for 7 weeks. He continued his preaching effort, but not limited to inmates of the prison. Before his discharge, he managed to attract 19 people from Jamaican, Polish, Russian, German, Belgian, Portuguese, Indian, French heritage. How perhaps in a connection with his own ordeal with the authorities, Sadiq would later remark, under the U.S. immigration law, Jesus would not permit entry into the United States. All right, so now let's go down. Let's go down to where he talks about the African American community. But before I go there, I want to go in here where it says in 1920, New York City. So in 1920, Sadiq was permitted entry into the United States, possibly attracted to New York's reputed culture. He journeyed to the city and assembled the first national headquarters of the Ahmadiyya Movement on Manhattan's Madison Avenue. As a philologist with a proficiency in Arabic and Hebrew linguistics, Sadiq successfully published articles on Islam in multiple American periodicals with a period of a few months, including in the New York Times. Moreover, as a lecturer and a charismatic public speaker, Sadiq secured approximately 50 lectures across several cities in the Northeast, including Chicago, Detroit, Grand Havens in Michigan, and his locale, New York City. As such, within a period of a few weeks, a dozen people of Christian and Muslim backgrounds converted to the Akhmadiya interpretation of Islam. Among those were some of the earliest converts to Islam in the United States, who converted to Islam in the early 1900s, such as Ahmad Anderson and George Baker. Whistle, a missionary in England before his arrival into the United States, Sadiq had a dream concerning a female American convert to the faith. The moment S.W. Sobolowski walked into community's headquarters on Madison Avenue, Sadiq interpreted her to be the fulfillment of his dream. Sobolowski would later join the movement and be given the name Fatima Mustafa. She became renowned as the first white American female to convert to Islam. Nonetheless, the most active female preacher of the movement during the 1920s was an African American, Madam Ratula. Madam Ratula. Who is Madam Ratula? Let's look her up. Give me a moment. Okay, then. Okay, well, I'll find that information later. I'll find it later. All right, then. So, anyways, but yeah, so the most active female preacher of the movement was Madam Rahatullah. So Madam Rahatullah was a very active preacher during that time period. Okay, and the first white female convert was Fatima Mustafa. All right, but here it is. Now here's the mosque in. Let's see. Okay, now here's the first building in Chicago. All right, this was in 1923. The first mosque. All right, that's the first mosque. All right, and then this is another masjid. All right, so it's the same building, but it says named in honor of Mutifi Muhammad Sadiq. Wash Wabash Avenue is today the site of Al Sadiq Mosque, the oldest standing mosque in the United States. So here it is today, and it was named after Motif Muhammad Sadiq. That's the building today. All right. Anyways, so now let's go down to the 1920s in Detroit, Chicago. So it says in October 1920, within a period of a few months of Sadiq arrival to New York City, Sadiq moved the headquarters to Chicago, Illinois. Accompanying this was the shift of the America's Akhmadiya Muslim community towards the problem of racial separatism, with particular focus on discrimination of Black Americans, perhaps triggered by segregation of African Americans, Muslims, and Arab Muslims who arrived in Illinois as laborers during the early 20th century. The Ahmadis made various attempts to unite and reconcile Muslims of different racial backgrounds and ethnicities. During the winter of 1920, Sadiq was elected president of an intra-Muslim society aiming to combat separatism and promote multiracial unity among Muslims across the United States. Moni, a non-Ahmadi Muslim and editor of the Al-Sarat, an Arabic newspaper, was elected secretary shortly after. Within the same year, Sadiq moved the national headquarters of the community to Highland Park in Detroit, Michigan. The city attracted Muslim workers of diverse ethnic backgrounds. The move came in an attempt to link various Muslim communities across the region. All right. So, and then it goes on to say, in 1922, Sadiq once again returned to Chicago and reestablished the national headquarters of the movement at 4448 Wabash Avenue. A converted house was used to serve as a mosque and a mission house. The mission house was from where the oldest Islamic magazine, the Muslim Sunrise, was to be published from. Whistle, based in Chicago, Sadiq continued to deliver his public lectures on Islam at schools, clubs, and lodges across the Midwest. Many a time he was successful in removing misconceptions concerning the religion, and occasionally his speeches attract converts. In 1923, Sadiq gave multiple lectures at the Universal Negro Improvement Association. So Sadiq gave lectures at the UNIA. Okay, so Marcus Garvey even had a good relationship with Duce Muhammad Ali, or Duce Ali Muhammad, who was also a Muslim himself, right? So this was, so you see that there was a little diversity there. So where he came and he spoke to the Black people in the UNIA movement, and he was able to convert some of the people into the Islamic doctrine. And so if you go back and look at the Oriental, right, there was the Oriental movement which was by Dusay Ali Muhammad, right, who was also the mentor of Marcus Garvey at that time. Okay, but continue on. It says in 1923, Sadiq gave multiple lectures at the Universal Negro Improvement Association, as a result of which the converted 40 members of the fraternal organization to Islam. In September 1923, Sadiq left the United States for India. He was replaced by Muhammad Dean, another missionary to the community. During his 3 years, Sadiq had converted 700 Americans to Islam. Named in honor of Motif Muhammad Sadiq, Washba Avenue is today the site of Al Sadiq Mosque, the oldest standing mosque in the United States. Okay. Now, it says, in contrast to the early converts to the movement who generally belonged to the diverse ethnic backgrounds, the converts during Sadiq's Chicago era were largely African American with relatively less white American. The cities of Chicago and Detroit, to some degree St. Louis, Missouri, and Gary, Indiana, were major centers of Ahmadiyya missionary activity during the 1920s. All right. So Muhammad Yaqub, formerly Andrew Jacob, Gulaman Rasul, formerly Mrs. Alas Russell, and James Sadiq, a Russian Tatar, were some of the key figures of the Akhmadiya activities. Some African-American converts emerged as prominent missionaries of the community. For example, Akhmadiya, who formerly may have been a Freemason or a member of the Moorish Science Temple, was appointed as the missionary in St. Louis, Missouri. Is said to have acquired roughly 100 converts in the city. J.H. Humphreys, one of Den's converts, became an active missionary of the Akhmadiya community himself after becoming disillusioned with Christianity. Humphreys was Belgian Congolese immigrant who studied at Tuskegee Institute for Evangelical Protestant Ministry. And as you can see, these are the pictures of the people who have converted. And as you can see, most of them are African Americans. Some of them are other ethnic background, like Asian or and some are European. But for the most part, you see a lot of African Americans. Okay. All right. So, I'm gonna read this little part right here. Then I'm gonna go to the next source. Right. So right here it says, in the late 1920s, Sufi Bagali arrived in the United States and replaced Muhammad Dean as a missionary. Bengali resumed Sadiq's tradition of giving lectures throughout the country. The lecture varied from talks on the life of Islamic Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to the question of overcoming racial prejudice in the United States. Within a few years of his arrival, he gave over 70 lectures, some of which were facilitated by the Multiracial and Ecumenical Christian Organization Fellowship of Faiths. Venues that were sponsored by the organization including the Chicago Temple, the First Congregational Church, the People's Church, and the Sinai Temple Men's Club. Many of these lectures catered for a large number of audience, up to and including 2,500 people. Other settings for talks include the institution of higher education, such as Northern Western University and University of Chicago. Many talks were featured in newspapers such as the Chicago Daily Tribune and the Chicago Daily News. Although in contrast to Sadiq era, the Ahmadiyya community toned down its multiracial rhetoric, perhaps in response to FBI's campaign to divide American Muslim groups in suspicion of potential sedition. It continued to address the issue of racism. At a lecture at the People's Church discussing racism, Bengali stated, Treat the colored people in a truly democratic spirit. Do not shut the doors of your churches, hotels, schools, and homes against them. Let them enjoy all the privileges which you possess. If they are poor, help them. If they are backward, uplift them. But for heaven's sake, do not despise them. All right. So as you can see, this man was speaking against racism. All right. So then right down here it says in August of 1932, August and September 1932, the Ahmadiyya movement participated in World Fellowship of Faith Convention, opened with a message from the Caliph and world head of Ahmadiyya movement, Mirza Bashir Uddin Mahmud Akman. The convention exhibited a speech on Islam promoting world peace and progress delivered by Muhammad Zafrullah Khan, an Ahmadi Muslim and a former president of All India Muslim League. In conference held on September 1st, 1935, Baghali attempted to give a practical example of variable race relation amongst his converts. He introduced a white convert, Muhammad Akman, and a black convert, Omar Khan. The two discussed Islamic qualities concerning race relation. Perhaps the most conspicuous was a conference at the Chicago Temple building attended by speakers of various religious and racial background. The conference, which was entitled "How Can We Overcome Color and Race Prejudice," was attended by over 2,000 people. By the 1940s, the Akhmadiya movement had between 5,000 and 10,000 members in the United States, a small speck in sight of the growing 2 million members worldwide. In light of this and a number of political, cultural concerns and rising tension in the Muslim world, the African American identity and its local issues were occasionally obscured. Moreover, during the 1940s, the Ahmadiyya movement began to shift away from its focus on the African American community and again towards the general public. Wow, now you see that. Now let's go into the information. So here's the book, right? So I'm gonna get into the book real fast, and I put it in a description section. So I put the book in the description section for those who may want to look it up and read into it. All right, so it's called Islam in the African American Experience, right, by Richard Brent Turner. Okay, so you can check this out on archive.org. Okay, so let's look at page 109. Right here where it says the Akhmadiya mission to America, a multiracial model for American Islam. Say, if you love Allah, follow me, then will Allah love you. Al-Imran. Now, the Harlem Muslim runs into several thousand. Since they have no mosques, the faithful worship in private homes and hired halls where on Saturday mornings their children study the Quran. They live quietly in Harlem, but during their festivals, they don rich robes, shawls, turbans, and fezzels on their native land. And the women wear gorgeous brocades and heavy decorative jewelries. Ordinarily, Muslims wear American dress, for most of them have lived in the United States more than 20 years. They possess a religious fervor that is expressed in much missionary work among American Negroes, whether they are African Arabs, Tatars, or American Negroes, Moors, Persians, or white. Muslims intermarry. The racial flows back and forth deifies classification. All right, so going down to where it says, this is how Rodi Atali, an eminent African-American journalist, Arthur reported for the New York Amsterdam Star News, described the cultural richness that he observed in Harlem's Muslim community in 1943. Atali's observations are important not only for what they tell us about the ethos of American Islam in the 20th century, but also for what they say about the relationship between African Americans and immigrant Muslim culture. During the 1920s, positive social and religious interaction between Muslims of different racial and ethnic groups was encouraged by the Indian missionaries of the Ahmadiyya movement in Islam. The Ahmadiyya was unquestionably one of the most significant movements in the history of Islam in the United States in the 20th century, providing as it did the first multiracial model for American Islam. The Ahmadis disseminate Islamic literature and converted Black and white Americans. They attacked the distortion of Islam in the media, established mosques and reading rooms, and translate the Quran into English. They also constitute the link between the immigrant Muslims, whose number included Arabs, Persian, Africans, Tatars, Turks, Albanians, and Yugoslavians, and black Muslim groups such as the Nation of Islam and the Moorish Science Temple of America. Thus, their goal was to alter permanently the historic patterns of racial and ethnic separation that exist amongst Muslims in America. Before we can understand the American paths of the Ahmadiyya movement more completely, however, we must first understand its origin in the 19th century in India. So I already went through that. Okay, so some of this stuff I'm going to kind of like skip down just a little bit. Okay. So basically, it goes into the origin of the movement. So right here, it says the Akhmadiya movement, which began among the Muslim of Punjab in 1880s, offer a new interpretation of Islam that, in its worldwide missionary outreach, contributes significantly to a rethinking of the religion for the modern age. Its founder, Ghulam Ahmad, the son of a middle-class Muslim landowner, was born in village of Qadian, Punjab, sometime between 1835 and 1839. Tradition has it that Ahmad was a dreamer who led a life of studious seclusion until he began to receive revelation in 1879 and became convinced that it was his obligation to spread his message throughout the world. All right. So that's the picture of him. Okay, that's the leader, that's the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement. Okay. Now, let's skip down to where it says to understand why the Orthodox Sunni Islam community opposed the Ahmadiyya movement. See, here this is where they opposed them. Check this out. To understand why the Orthodox Sunni Muslim community violently opposed the Ahmadiyya movement, we must first examine briefly the religious meaning of Islam for Orthodox Muslims. Muslims believe that Muhammad, the founder of their religion, was a prophet of God in the line of Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. However, they do not regard him as divine. Muhammad preached a message of radical monotheism and charity to the people of Mecca, and eventually distinguished himself not only as a prophet but also as social and economic and political reformer in Medina. Studying the life of Muhammad and also his revelation, which are collected in the Quran, Muslims established not only a special way to worship God, but also a way of which encompasses communal solidarity and a distinct culture, with the Arabic language as the universal medium of expression. All right, so, and then goes on to talk about Imam, expression of faith, is a fundamental principle of Islam. It embraces the basic tenets of the religion: the unity of Allah, the acceptance of Muhammad as his messenger, the Quran as the word of God, belief in angels, commitment to commandments for behavior, and belief in the final judgment and bodily resurrection. The five pillars of Islam fall under the heading of ibadah, the ceremonial duties of the religion. They are the following: the basic confession of faith, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his prophet. Second is prayer 5 times a day while facing Mecca. The third one is fasting during the month of Ramadan. The fourth is alim giving, and which is zakat or charity. And the fifth one is the pilgrimage to the sacred city of Mecca. Okay, that's Hajj. So it says, although the Ahmadiyya movement considered itself to be the true Islam and conformed to the most fundamental tenets of the religion, its conception of prophecy as a process that continued after Muhammad was controversial and potentially heretical. Orthodox Muslims believe that Muhammad was the final prophet and that he sealed Islamic revelation with the transmission of the Quran, which was thought to be the profession of the Jewish and Christian messages. The idea of the seal of the prophets is so essential to Islamic identity that many Muslims believe that a person who does not believe that Muhammad was the last prophet is not a believer. Okay, and that's according to the Orthodox Islam. Okay, that's according to the Sunni doctrine. If you do not believe that Prophet Muhammad was the last prophet, you are not a believer in their eyes. Okay, let's continue. It said it is important to note, however, that the Ahmadiyya idea of continuous prophecy became a paradigm for Black Islamic movements as new urban prophets called on this idea to support their creative signification or signification of Islamic identity for their Black followers in the United States in the 20th century. Moreover, the Indian Muslims as their first role model from the Islamic world, heterodoxy and synthesis became the rule rather than the exception of the Black American Muslims. To other aspects of the Ahmadi heterodoxy that later influenced Islam in Black America were the interpretation of Mujahid and Jihad. Okay. So Majid means the guidance or the guiding one, right? Or the renewer. And the Jihad represents the war and battle. So Majid means the renewer, and Jihad means the war or battle. Okay. So let's see, we're gonna go further down. What else they have besides all right, as you can see, that's Motif Muhammad Sadiq. That's a picture of him, right? Okay, so we went through that. So let's see what else we can find. Okay, wait a minute. Let me read something here that's interesting. Right here it says hold on. Let me go up. All right. So it says apparently the Ahmadis had not been aware up to that time of the discrimination against Muslim and Indian immigrants in the United States in the early 1900s. Right? Before Sadiq's ordeal, many Muslim immigrants from the Middle East had already been refused entry by the immigration authority at Ellis Island. An initial court decision that was eventually overruled said that they could not become citizens of the United States because they were neither Caucasian nor African. This is important to our discussion because of the centrality of Indian racial identity to the Ahmadiyya signification of Islamic identity, a signification that appealed to African American converts in 1920s. Now, isn't that interesting, right? And it says in 1920s, several anti-Hindu riots erupted on the West Coast. These racially oriented uprisings were directed against immigrants from the Punjab who were perceived as an economic threat to local workers in the smaller towns. Although some of these immigrants were Sikh and Muslims, all Indians were viewed by white Americans as Hindus or ragheads because they wore turbans. Typical of the reaction, Agnes Foster Burkine wrote, "The Hindus and the Hindus invasion is the latest racial problem with which we in the West have to deal. This is the propitious moment for the State Department to adopt an amendment to the Vedas and to tell our brothers of the East that while the earth is large enough for us all, there is no part of it that would comfortably accommodate both branches of the Iranian family." All right, so check this out. In 1917, widespread hostility against Asia in the United States resulted in the passage of Oriental Exclusion Act, which exclude all laborers from the Asiatic Bar Zone, right, which is Arabia, Afghanistan, India, Indonesia, or Indochina, the East Indies, and other Asian nations. The Johnson Act of 1921 established strict annual quotas for Asian immigrants, and finally, the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924 closed the door to most non-European immigrants by setting up a national origin system that gave North and West Europeans a huge advantage over other groups. Wow, now you see this? Check this out. For a while, some Indians became American citizens by persuading the courts that their racial classification was Caucasian and that they were white. However, when Bhagat Singh Thun brought his case for citizenship to the Supreme Court in 1923, the doors were closed to Indian immigrants and they were not reopened until 1960s. The United States versus Bhagat Singh Thun, Justice George Sunderland ruled that not all Caucasians were legally accepted as white people in the United States. Since immigration legislation in 1870s had ruled that Europeans were white people, Indian immigrants therefore were not eligible for naturalization under a 1790 statute that limit naturalization to free white people. Because of these pressures, which reached a peak in the early 1920s, many Indians left the United States around the time of Motif Muhammad Sadiq's arrival. And as we shall see, many of those who remained adopted a militant third world racial identity that connected them politically and racially to the oppressed people of color in the United States and abroad. Now, who would ever known that? See, a lot of stuff we don't really know, right? This is information that we don't even know about. So many Indians, if they wanted to stay here, they consider themselves to be Caucasian. Wait a minute. But let's go on down because I ain't got that much time on here. So all right, so now all right, so let's go down to where where there's the converts of women, right? So Sadiq's missionary for the Ahmadiyya movement in Islam came from a deep spiritual commitment. He had been a close companion of Ghulam Ahmad, the founder of the movement, and believed that the latter had been favored with the divine gifts of prophecy. Mutifi Sadiq also believed in the mystical power of dreams. While he was still in England, Sadiq had a dream about an American female convert when S.W. Sombolewski walked into his headquarters in New York. He considered her the fulfillment of his dream. Sombolewski eventually converted to the Akhmadiyya movement, and Sadiq named her Fatima Mustafa. She was the first white American woman to join the religion, right? And Sadiq's most active female convert and publicizer in New York, however, was Madam Rahatullah, an African American who, according to Sadiq, secured one American convert and one Muslim to the Ahmadiyya order in 1921. She also wrote a poem entitled "The Beauties of Islam" to express enthusiasm about her new faith. All right. Okay, so again, I would recommend this book to you guys. All right. Let's go back. So this is a good book. So the title of the book is called Islam in the American Experience by Richard Brent Turner. All right. So I put this in the description section. So I put the sources in the description section so you guys can check it out. All right. Now let's go on to the next. So, all right, this is the article that comes from alhakam.org. Alhakam.org is a Islamic website, okay, that goes into Islamic history. All right, so this is where they talk about Azrak, Mutifi, Muhammad Sadiq, and the Arab Muslim community of America, right? So let's see, where do I want to begin on this? All right, so let's go to the beginning. It says a large number of Arab Muslims were residing in Detroit and New York City and their suburbs. They were divided along ethnic and racial lines. Religiously, they were inactive and thus unable to spread Islam, having heard and read about Hazrat Mutifi Sadiq. appointment as Islamic missionary, the Muslim of the Midwest and Northeast invited him and arranged his lecture on Islam. After spending a few weeks in Philadelphia, where he landed, Hazrat Mutifi Muhammad Sadiq stationed himself in New York in 1920. It was only after the fourth month that the Arab immigrants, Muslims of Detroit, Michigan, invited him for a lecture. So he traveled from New York to Detroit in June of 1920. An Arab newspaper of New York, Al Baran, reported his visit in its edition of June 26, 1920, as follows. The Islamic community in Detroit, Michigan has held a general body meeting on June 14 for the reception of Mr. Multifi Muhammad Sadiq, one of the best men in India. He has come all the way from New York, especially just to visit the Islamic community here in this city. All right. Mr. Multifi began this meeting with the following words: in the name of the law and blessing be sent upon the holy Arab prophet. Then he delivered his address in both English and Arabic. He expressed how the Muslims of India were highly determined and dedicated to uplift the pride of Islam again, and how supportive they were towards their brothers in the East and the West. His address left a noble impact in the hearts of the attendees. All right, so and then goes on to say, in February 1921, he was invited again to Detroit for a lecture. So he arrived there on February the 5th, 1921, with the characteristic hospitality of Arab Muslims. He was offered a friendly and generous reception and accommodation. He stayed for more than a month in Detroit and its suburb Highland Park with these Arab Muslim friends and delivered a series of lectures on Islam. Okay. And then goes on to say, Islam set before big businessmen and governmental heads of the neighbor city Sunday most savory of Eastern dishes in a dinner tendered to Prophet Mutifi Muhammad Sadiq of Islam, missionary of the Ahmadiyya Movement. All right. So it says, what Muslim generally and Syrian Arabs especially have witnessed during the last 3 weeks, they have neither seen such a magnificent time since their migration to America, nor have they attained such popularity. You would not find any morning or evening newspaper that is not filled with the joyous mention of their praise, their quality, their religion, their morals and lifestyles. And I swear that sincere American journalists would never have mentioned them if the beauties of this noble ummah had not been made apparent to them. Furthermore, we can say that due to the comment of Allama Mutifi Muhammad Sadiq of India, and as a result of his eloquent speeches and interviews with all the journalists, the name of Muslims and especially Arabs has spread like fragrance. Okay, so as you can see, he was a very eloquent speaker. He was able to speak in different communities, not just only in the African American community, but also in the Arab communities and other places. So he was able to attract many people from various racial backgrounds and get them to convert into the Akhmadiya movement or into Islam. All right. So let's go on and let's see what else we can find on here in this article. All right. So he had good relationship with the Arab community in Detroit. And, you know, Detroit has a very, because my family was from Detroit. My mother was from Detroit, Michigan. All right. And Detroit has a very strong Islamic population up there, especially in the Dearborn area of Michigan. They have a very strong population. You know, so the Islamic population is very heavy up in the Midwest, northern region, like places like New York, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Philadelphia, especially. They have a very strong Islamic population. It says, thanking Arab brethren for their kind hospitality, Hazrat Mutifi Sadiq later wrote, Arabians have a worldwide reputation for hospitality. Thank Allah, I have met examples of this hospitality right here in America in the venerable personality of Mr. and Mrs. Ratum, Mr. Shami of Detroit, and Mr. and Mrs. Karub, Mr. S.A. Sahara of Highland Park. All right, so it says his detailed report about this tour of Detroit and its neighboring cities is published in April 7 of 1921 issue of the official newspaper of Ahmadiyya Jamaat al-Fazal Qadan. In it, he gives a brief introduction of Detroit City and then highlights his activities during this tour. These were truly days of grace in Detroit when Hazrat Sadiq present the true picture of Islam and its founder in front of the West on such a large scale. He also advised the Muslim community in the following words: a democracy in republic such as we find in the United States today is exactly according to the spirit of Muslim government that was established in the beginning by the Muslim caliphs, which was a government of the people, for the people, by people. When my Muslim brethren tried to be good citizens in this country, they performed one of the great religious duties of their faith: be honest to the country and people where you are, to be loyal to their flag. Try to take your best part in the patriotic, social benevolence, and charitable works. Learn the American language thoroughly. This is my advice. And then he goes on to say, last but not least, I advise my brethren to spread the faith of their forefathers, not in any aggressive way, but by the good example of right thinking, right speaking, and right acting, hating no one, loving all, and thus proving to be good followers of the great master prophet. All right. So even then, okay, there was discrimination against Islam in America. All right. Even then, discrimination against the Arabs and the Indian people at that time. So there was serious discrimination. Okay. And so this is during the 1920s. They had a hard time getting citizenship here in this country. They had a hard time being able to practice Islam freely. So if you're talking about 9/11, 2001, that whole discrimination against the Arab community, Islamic community, that's not just the beginning. It was happening way before that. It was going on prior to that. So it was something that was taking place, but a lot of people just don't know the history about it. So there was always that form of discrimination against the Arab community, the Indian, the Asian, those who was practitioner, those who did not practice Christianity. You know what I mean? So Europeans always wanted to be that dominant force. They wanted to be the center of attention. They wanted to be the center of attention. They wanted Christianity to be the main religion. All right. So anybody that did not practice Christianity or they were not a Caucasian way, they was looked at as a minority, right? And they were looked at as pagans, or they looked at as non-believers and all of that. So these are the mindset they had at that time. Okay. All right. So here it is. It says untold story of Black Muslims in America, pioneering African-American Ahmadi Muslim converts, St. Louis. All right. This was written in November 20th of 2020. Okay. Now check this out. Let's go on to this real quick. Let's see how much time I got left. All right, so it says we would have to sell dinners to raise money. There would be fried chicken, mashed potato, and green beans. Ibrahim Khalil would take the orders. Abdul Ali put the wood in the stove, and Amos Ali would fry the chicken with Ahmadiyya Khalid and Sister Zainab. I remember they would stand cooking all day so much so their ankles would swell. This is Sister Azaza Akma. A previous article discussed the pioneer activity of Sheikh Ahmadin, who established Ahmad in St. Louis. This legacy continued for decades more. It has a rich, vibrant history. It is the second longest fully fledged independent chapter, which quickly became a powerhouse chapter in America that would host pioneer Ahmadis across each decade. This was another pivotal chapter of the early Akhmadiya community. All right. So it says, like Chicago, it had the close-knit feel. It was the center of a thriving group of individuals where brotherhood and sisterhood were paramount. This was a cozy community with about 20 families between the 1940s and 1950s. One Chicago member described it as a small community that had a real family touch. One could see the generation there. Even to this day, there are now many generations of African Americans Ahmadis. One example is Abdul Aziz, who joined around 1944. He had a son, Abibullah Aziz. He had his own sons of Azim and Zaire. Zaim's son was Omar ibn Yamin, and Ibn Khalil spread the message of Islam diligently, which led to the second wave of conversion after Motif Sadiq Sahab. They were able to convert Usman Khalid, who in turn converted Amina Khalid. These were the pioneer of St. Louis community. All right. And so this comes from the source, and they prayed to African American Journey to Islam exhibit, St. Louis, Missouri. Taking it all the way back, Sister Aziza remembers the community and its humble beginning. She fondly recalled her childhood within these times. The community looked different. There was no Lena, Nazarat, and no Chanda amongst many of the others things which later have come to play a pivotal role in the community. All right. All right, then. So it says at that time, it was nurtured through children classes, the regular Sunday meetings, and frequent go-getters or get-togethers, This cultivated with the feeling of the family. Sister Aza recollected that even if there were arguments, they will always be mended. The local fraternity did not stop a global segment during the partition of India into the Hindu majority India and Muslim majority Pakistan. They would get together to raise money for the Muslim of the community who stayed behind in Kadam, India, known as Darvish. They numbered 313, which was the same number of Muslim participants who fought the first battle at Badr at the time of the Prophet. All right, so here's the pictures, okay? You see, that's the St. Louis chapter. All right. All right, then. So I'm gonna go ahead and skip down where it says early Legion Ilama of St. Louis. So early accounts of Jamila Monir and Aza Akma were recounted, who were pioneer sisters in the St. Louis chapter of the Akhmadiya Muslim community and hurling from an American Akhmadi dynasty. They both related at a time of segregation that converting to Islam may well have led to one's family disowning them. In a racially charged environment, those that further differentiate themselves could have suffered with volatile consequences. This did not stop there being a strong sense of possibilities within this chapter. So excuse me for my mispronunciation of words. The racial climate was problematic for many. Sister Bersha Sahida was a white convert. For her to associate with African Americans, join a black church, and to convert to a new religion was unheard of. There were few places in America where blacks and whites could intermingle. She would regularly go to the mission house. However, the only place in the city where she could sit with her sister would be the Walgreens coffee shop or in the park. All right. So it says this is one of the many examples of the multiracial makeup of the community. There was a strong connection between all the sisters here. They were welcoming to new converts. Sister Abdul Raza converted in 1946 after being affiliated with the Moorish Science Temple of America in a non-Ahmadi Muslim group. She was an active participant. She was a regular in attendance and financial contribution to her demise. She is the first recorded president for St. Louis Laja and was president for many years. All right. It says St. Louis Sisterhood contained many future national presidents, one of whom was Sister Mornira Akma, who was born in Mississippi on March 31st, 1930. She married James Carr in 1948 and joined the Methodist Church. She migrated to St. Louis in 1951. 2 years later, they accepted the movement, adopting the name Monira and Monir Akhmad. She became the fifth national president at her time. She had 10 functioning Lajna chapters. She died in 1996. So the St. Louis chapter has a tremendous history. It was hard to narrow down a male and female to focus on a single article. Abdul Ali and Alamas Ali were some of the early pioneers. Okay, so this article goes into the Ahmadiyya movement in Chicago, as you can see. So, and they had their own chapter in, not Chicago, in St. Louis. They had their own chapter in St. Louis area. All right. So that's it. You guys can check out the sources. I put it in description. I put it in the description box. So make sure you check it out in the description box if you want to look up more sources on these information about the Ahmadiyya movement. So that's a very interesting. That's some interesting stuff. So basically, the Ahmadiyya movement was, it's a very peaceful movement. Not a lot of catastrophe going on. It was very multiracial. So, but it attracted many of those within the African American community than any other community. You know what I mean? So it gave them some sense of being able to gain some form of organizational skills and just try on a different faith. All right. I'm surprised that it's not really spoke. Well, I'm not surprised, but it's just kind of strange that it's not spoken of a lot. Especially when it played a very prominent role within the Black community before the Moorish Zion Temple and the Nation of Islam and the 5 Percenters, etc. Like, this was like one of the main aspects of Black America in Islam, the Ahmadiyya movement. All right, but I want to tell you guys, thank you for tuning in. Shout out to Brother Kamathi. Shout out to Young Dub. Thank y'all for coming through. Thank y'all for showing y'all support to this channel. If you want to subscribe, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. Like the channel, share the channel. Tell to your friends, share it to your family. Have a discussion on it, build on it, whatever you want to do. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and log off of here. I want you guys to have a good one. Ramadan Mubarak to all the brothers and sisters out there that's observing the month of Ramadan. So shout out to you guys, and peace and power elevation to everybody else. Until next time, deuces. Take it easy.